On the 23rd of July, 1982, production was underway for a film version of the popular science fiction horror television series, The Twilight Zone. On this particular day, cast and crew would be filming an intense action scene set in a war zone. A shoot involving a real helicopter, pyrotechnic special effects, waist-deep water, and 2 child actors. This complex scene would ultimately go catastrophically wrong, and the fallout from it would change the movie industry forever. The Twilight Zone, first broadcast in 1959, was a popular sci-fi horror anthology television series. Each episode would be a standalone story, usually featuring some fantastical or surreal elements, and almost always ending with an unexpected twist. Most episodes began with a distinctive narrative introduction, which always ran along similar lines. You're travelling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop? The Twilight Zone. Over the course of many years, The Twilight Zone consistently caught the imagination of viewers, leading to significant success and many spin-off projects. There have been both television and radio series, integrations with theme park rides, and many references in pop culture to this hugely influential media franchise. In the early 1980s, the idea for a Twilight Zone movie arose, and the prospect was exciting enough to attract the attention of legendary film director Steven Spielberg. He wouldn't be the only director involved, however. The film would be an anthology of 4 separate tales, 3 of them retellings of existing Twilight Zone episodes. Each story would have a different director. John Landis, a director best known for comedy films such as An American Werewolf in London and National Lampoon's Animal House, was hired to direct one of the other segments. His story would see a bigoted man magically transported back in time to experience firsthand the terrible treatment some of the groups of people he hated were historically subjected to. In one scene, the man would flee a Vietnamese village at night while being shot at by American soldiers. As he fled, he would carry to safety 2 children from the village, thus somewhat redeeming himself before the end of the story. Vic Morrow, a prolific film and TV actor from the time, was hired for the role. Casting the 2 children he would save, however, was somewhat harder. Labour laws meant that filmmakers had to get special permission for any shoots involving minors, and that it wasn't permitted for children to film late at night or to take part in scenes involving pyrotechnic special effects. To get around this restriction, director John Landis and his producers illegally hired 2 children related to friends of crew members. They would pay the parents of the children in cash and carefully avoid mentioning the presence of children to the shoot's fire safety and welfare officer. The children hired were 7-year-old Micah Din Lee and 6-year-old Renee Shin-Yi Chen. Neither child was an actor, but both were outgoing and adventurous, and their parents believed that they would enjoy the experience of being involved in a real Hollywood production. One parent of each child would be present for the shoot, and they were assured that there would be no pyrotechnics or dangerous stunt work, only some loud noises. On the 23rd of July, 1982, the time had come to film the intense action sequence where Vic Morrow's character would flee a village under heavy gunfire. The location chosen was Indian Dunes, a film ranch near the Six Flags Magic Mountain amusement park in Valencia, California. A mock village was constructed and the various set pieces were prepared, including an authentic Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter. Flying this helicopter was Dorsey Wingo, a pilot who had served in the Vietnam War and had experience with this specific type of helicopter. At the same time, however, Wingo had no experience navigating the hierarchy of a film set. He would undertake 3 flights that evening to allow the filming of 3 different shots. The first flight went well, but during the second, the detonation of a pyrotechnic effect blasted so much water into the rotors of the helicopter that it disrupted Wingo's ability to see. He complained about this to a production manager, telling them that subsequent explosions should not be as powerful or as close, and voicing his concern that, as well as water, debris could be blasted up into the rotor blades. There are conflicting accounts as to whether these complaints reached director John Landis, and how seriously they were taken if they did. After the production manager spoke to Landis, pilot Dorsey Wingo was told not to worry. The time came to shoot the scene in which Vic Morrow would carry the two children across the river. At this stage, it was around 2:30 a.m. Dorsey Wingo was at the controls of the helicopter, hovering at a height of around 7.5 meters or 25 feet above the set, accompanied by several other crew members. John Landis was on the ground nearby, coordinating the action. Shooting began. Multiple cameras tracked Vic Morrow as he waded across the river, a child under each arm, pyrotechnic effects and squibs exploding around them. At one point, he stumbled, dropping Renee Chen into the water. As he rushed to pick up the child, a nearby pyrotechnic effect detonated so forcefully that the resultant flames engulfed the tail rotor of the hovering helicopter. Dorsey Wingo lost control, and the aircraft immediately crashed down into the water on top of Vic Morrow, Micah Din Lee, and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, killing them instantly. Emergency services were called to the scene, but the injuries inflicted were so catastrophic that there was no possibility of survival for the three victims. Dorsey Wingo and several other crew from the helicopter were taken to hospital with minor injuries, but soon released. Funerals were arranged for those who had lost their lives. Many mourners at Vic Morrow's funeral were surprised when director John Landis turned up uninvited to give a eulogy. During this speech, Landis not only mourned the loss of the actor, but also emphasized how sudden, unpredictable, and impossible to prevent the accident had been. Landis also attended the funerals of Micah and Renee, again without invitation. An investigation into the cause of the crash was launched by the National Transportation Safety Board. They concluded that the pyrotechnic effect had blasted debris up into the rotors of the helicopter and also caused some heat damage. This had led to the loss of control and the disastrous crash. While the mechanical cause could be clearly established, who was to blame was another question altogether. Soon after the crash, lengthy and complicated legal proceedings began. There was both a criminal trial and a civil suit. Several senior members of production staff were acquitted of any wrongdoing. Dorsey Wingo, the helicopter pilot, was criticized for both his failure to act more strongly on his concerns and for comments he made during the trial that actor Vic Morrow could have moved out of the way. He was ultimately cleared of criminal charges. Director John Landis received the most attention, with many claims made about his behavior and attitude on set. Several people recalled him shouting for the helicopter to fly lower, directly before the crash. Others alleged that they had heard him joking about being thrown in jail for hiring children illegally, and joking that he might lose the helicopter. It was also claimed that he had ignored advice about safety on set before, and had used live ammunition to create bullet impact effects on plants earlier in the production. Landis denied these claims and was ultimately acquitted of any criminal wrongdoing. Multiple civil claims were settled out of court in favor of the bereaved. The year after his acquittal, John Landis invited the jury who had cleared him to a special screening of his latest film as a thank you for their decision. He went on to have a long and productive career. The disaster led to significant changes in the film industry. Warner Brothers began to draw up guidelines for any filming with potentially dangerous acts or elements. The Directors Guild of America started a telephone hotline to quickly answer safety and best practice queries from producers and directors, while the Screen Actors Guild introduced another telephone hotline for its members to report shoots that they felt were unsafe. Pyrotechnic effects became more tightly regulated. The business of making movies, particularly movies which involve risky stunts and complicated action sequences, is still a dangerous one. There are still many issues around safety on set. The changes made in the aftermath of the Twilight Zone disaster, however, represented a huge step forward in empowering everyone involved in the movie business to recognize, report, and ultimately prevent unsafe situations. The Twilight Zone movie was released, with a cut-down version of the first story still included. It received mixed reviews, but was a financial success, and built interest in the Twilight Zone franchise. Director Steven Spielberg, who had previously been friends with John Landis but severed ties with him after the accident, later said, "No movie is worth dying for. I think people are standing up much more now than ever before to producers and directors who ask too much."